Gotcha. Yep.
No, because you have muted. Okay, no, muted that. Is it working? Yes. And if anywhere is fine, I was gonna sit in the front over there. And then start eating. I want to thank all of you for coming. This is the Regional Planning Graduate Studio. This is their second presentation of the work they've been doing with our amazing partners, Pioneer Valley Transit Authority. And I don't want to steal their thunder, so I will pass it off to Caleb, who will kick us off. And we will be presenting for about 35 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A at the end. Thank you again for coming.
Welcome, and thank you all for joining us this morning. We are the UMass Amherst Fall 2021 Regional Planning System. Our project, Valley on Board, is a partnership with Pioneer Valley Transit Authority under their Pioneer Valley Transit Review and Improvement Plan Study features. This studio is part of a larger 2-year partnership between the PTA and the UMass Regional Planning Department, the goal of which is to redesign the regional transit network to better serve both current and future riders into the next 20 years. My name is Caleb Zimmerman, and I, along with my colleagues Olivia Steele, Brendan Garrity, and Olivia James, will be presenting a summary overview of our work for the past few months. Additional detailed information on our work is available on the posters around the room here, and as well as our forthcoming comprehensive summary. And all of our work, including the recording of today's presentation, will be available on our website, valleyonboard.org. So we encourage everyone here in the audience, and as well as those joining us online, to explore that website. I would like to acknowledge a few of our esteemed guests that are joining us here today. Sandra Sheehan, PBTA Administrator, Tulubex Oke, Manager of Transit Planning and Analysis with PBTA, Alex Forrest, Transit Planner with the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, as well as all drivers, mechanics, and other administrative staff who are here or attending virtually from garages throughout the Valley, and the Dean of our college, the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, Dean Rethmeyer. Thank you all for being with us today. Before I move into the presentation, I'd like to acknowledge that this region and the University of Massachusetts Amherst were founded and built on the unceded homelands of the Hometown Nation on the land of the Norwood Tuck community. And with that, let's get into it. So, our client for this project is the Pioneer Valley Transit Authority, who was established in 1974 and has grown to become the largest regional transit agency in the Commonwealth, located in Western Massachusetts. PBTA operates in 24 member communities across Franklin, Camden, and Hampshire counties, and that includes a mixture of urban, suburban, and rural areas. Currently, the PBTA runs 45 bus routes, 36 of those fixed routes, which are seen on the map here. And a redesign of these 36 routes serves as the basis for our role within this 2-year project. This project came about by the way of the PBTA being awarded grant funding through the Helping Obtain Prosperity for Everyone program offered by the United States Federal Transit Administration. It is often referred to by its acronym HOPE, which you can see here on the slide, and we'll be using for the rest of our presentation here today. The PBTA then partnered with UMass and agreed upon a 2-year project timeline in which route recommendations would be created. After our initial route recommendations are offered, next year's planning studio will conduct an extensive public outreach process in order to receive critical feedback from stakeholders across the valley. Over the course of this semester, our planning studio undertook much of phase 1 that you can see here on the timeline. And the steps displayed at the top of the slide serve as a guideline for the process which we use from the start of our work to what we are discussing here today. The first 2 steps involve us getting to know the region through extensive research, including riding PBTA buses and documenting our impressions, reviewing transit and planning literature, and developing a SWOT analysis to identify the PBTA's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to its current system. In order to use this information to develop route recommendations to better serve our future riders, we then went through a scenario development process to help us envision different possible futures, which I'll tell you about in a few minutes. To get started with our route redesign, we first had to figure out how are we going to measure whether they were successful. To understand our metrics for success, it is critical to identify that the main objective of the HOPE program is to fund projects that seek to improve areas of persistent poverty, commonly known as environmental justice communities. Criteria that define an environmental justice community include 1 or more of the following in a census block group: a lack of English language proficiency, household incomes that are well below state median levels, and a high percentage of minority in the population. As you can see on the map on the right side of the screen there, that the PBTA operates in a region where where many of these communities are found, particularly in and around the Springfield area. So our redesign process was focused on improving the picture out for all potential riders with a specific focus on serving those most vulnerable communities. We were guided by improvement of the following 3 principles: access, equity, and efficiency. It is crucial to note that an effective public transit system can function as a gateway to opportunity, and our goal is to make improvements within the PBTA system to actualize that goal. There is no metric for measuring the trip you are not able to take. Every trip not taken, when you are unable to accept that job across town, you miss out on a critical doctor's appointment, or you lose out on an after-school mentorship program. So we understand that providing a system that works best for our most vulnerable populations can lead to upward mobility, upward economic mobility, and the potential to break the chain of generational poverty. As I mentioned earlier, we used a process called scenario planning to visualize a variety of futures in which transit must serve the community. This long-term visioning technique, often used by planners to help create one or multiple plausible futures of a region, allow planners to attempt to not just address, but also anticipate potential uncertainties that the future may hold. And the goal of this process was to create 4 unique visions of the Pioneer Valley over the next 20 years. To get there, we conducted research to understand trends impacting the future and how planners across the region envision the future for their cities and towns. We reviewed our SWOT analysis that I mentioned earlier. We interviewed planners in the Pioneer Valley. We reviewed comprehensive plans and analyzed data and information about population shifts, climate change, and other pertinent trends. From this, we derived a set of common drivers to consider in each of our scenarios, which we'll be going more over later. We then use these scenarios as the basis for designing route recommendations to serve our communities into the future. And once again, I will reiterate, our metrics of access, equity, and efficiency were at the forefront of this design process. These route recommendations consist of both newly designed routes and alterations to the existing fixed route system that was shown earlier. While each set of these recommendations was made within a specific future vision of the region, we wanted to compare how each set of the new routes performed in terms of our 3 main metrics in place of the other scenarios. In doing this process, which Brendan will be going more into, key findings from the different redesigns were extrapolated and identified as top-level recommendations that the PBTA could look to implement regardless of the future the region finds itself in. With that, I will hand over to Victoria, who will walk us through each of our scenarios.
Hello everyone, can you hear me okay? My name is Victoria. Thank you for the introduction. So I'm going to take you through our scenario planning process and what came of it. Scenario planning is a process where planners consider various plausible futures. By identifying and assessing key factors, this allows for planners to deal with uncertain futures and potential issues that may arise. This project had us considering what the valley would look like for the year 2040. We acknowledge that the future is yet to be determined, but integrating scenarios in this matter allows for us to begin to plan ahead in a way that can accommodate a multitude of uncertainties. Next, I will talk about the different types of research we performed in order to establish our drivers, which aided us in scenario development. In order to properly design our scenarios and pick our key drivers, we studied comprehensive plans. We read through multiple PBTA partner community conferences. This helped us to align their goals with our scenarios and provided information on projected economic and population growth areas. We also read the Comprehensive Regional Transit Plan Update 2020 and the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission's Our Next Future, a regional comprehensive plan. For transit literature, we studied the PBTA system review, as well as a multitude of scenario planning, research, and policy briefs. Another form of research that we did were our planner interviews. 10 questions were sent out by email with the themes of dream projects, current and future development plans that require transit connectivity, as well as the strengths and weaknesses of PBTA in general. We received 11 responses out of the 24 member communities. Those that did not respond or left questions blank are considered data as well. It is possible that some communities do not have a strong working relationship with PBTA. And for those that did respond, we were able to hash out they would like to work with PBTA more. Then we use MaxQDA to organize data. These visualizations, along with the analysis, will be featured in our final report. Hearing opinions from those who hold decision-making positions, it was very impactful to our work. The comprehensive plans, transit and scenario planning research, and planner interviews all helped our process of identifying which drivers affected our scenarios most. I will now go through each driver one by one so that you can understand how each functions within our scenarios. Climate change and its effects is a driver that is most consistent throughout our scenarios. Extreme weather events, longer growing seasons, and climate migration are all large driving factors within each scenario. Policy affects each scenario differently in consideration of growth development priorities, implementation of planning recommendations, and transportation policy. Reading through comprehensive plans is especially important considering this driver. The planning decisions within the northern and southern sections of the valley play a large role in our scenarios. Funding as a driver can create prosperity or the inability to make positive changes within each scenario. Transit investment and infrastructure investment are considered regionally, as well as how they affect different sections of the service area. The generational value impact driver affects age groups differently in regards to household sizes and educational attainment. These factors affect development patterns and demographics within the valley. The historical legacy of the valley is similar within all of our scenarios. To develop the future, we must understand the past. The northern section of the valley leans into its agricultural past, while the southern portion of the valley deals with its industrial job sector differently in each scenario. This affects population diversity, the tax base, employment, and growth. Last but not least, we have global impacts. There are certain trends and truths, such as wage stagnation, which limits buying power for younger generations, as well as the continued shifts to hybrid or remote work situations. Remote work is a popular concept currently, and within all of our scenarios, we do envision it continuing. Each scenario represents a bundle of outcomes. These outcomes are the results of the drivers that I just explained to you. Within each scenario, we consider the region as a whole, but also consider the difference between the northern and southern sections of the valley. And that is very important to a lot of our scenarios. The Holyoke Mountain Range acts as a division line as well as Route 202. Some have jokingly described this division as a curtain. So here are our four scenarios side by side. We're using radio visuals with a circle in the middle. That represents our business as usual scenario. So after the presentation, please feel free to visit our website, that's back, or see the visuals on the wall. For greater detail. So to properly apply scenario planning, it is critical that you establish a baseline. This is often referred to as business as usual scenario, or in our case, we call it valley stasis. Establishing a baseline scenario allows for us to consider and create recommendations for the day if current trends continue. You will see that in each of the following 3 scenarios, there are events or shifts that create a deviation from this established baseline. Within this scenario, climate change intensifies, creating more extreme weather events and an influx in climate migration to the area. Younger folks desire smaller households and concentrate in the valley's urban areas. Car and home ownership decline, which leads to a greater reliance on public transportation, but unfortunately there is no new buy-in for transit advancements, such as bus routes. The new small city scenario is the one we consider the best case scenario. Increased funding from the federal infrastructure bill paired with adoption of regional planning recommendations creates greater regional connectivity. Vibrant cities within the valley become the preferred destination for residents due to the regional connectivity and PVTA and expanded rail. We focus on smart growth, clean energy, and education to create a scenario in which public transportation shifts to clean energy vehicles. With this new attraction to urban centers, sprawl is greatly reduced. Within the Scaled Valley scenario, policy and funding adapts and cause community college and trade schools to be cost-free, with no new debt forgiveness policy for your university enrollments and funding drop, which leads to the northern section having a decreased population. Many residents lose their jobs in UMass, causing some to leave Valley. Trade schools and community colleges in the southern section see an increase in enrollment, which causes alumni to open a multitude of businesses nearby. These new jobs bring prosperity, and the southern section reverts back to creating industrial legacy. PVTA then adapts service to the new job centers. Higher ground is similar to the Scaled Valley scenario due to the strong emphasis on the division between the northern and southern sections of the valley. This division is further complicated by the even greater in-migration from climate change. The northern section of the valley is more proactive in planning, especially in regards to sustainable development and new housing. State and federal funding increases, allowing UMass to expand agriculture and renewable energy research, leading to job growth and student retention. Middle and high-income residents move to the northern section of the valley, leaving the flood vulnerable southern section to low-income and migrants, hence the name grant. PVTA faces uncertain funding combined with the need to accommodate diverse service across the whole region. As I mentioned earlier, the purpose of scenario planning is to provide us with a way to attempt to plan for the future, no matter what it looks like. Now that we have our potential future scenarios, we can give specific route recommendations for each. With that, I will give it over to Brennan, who will be going over route recommendations.
Everybody hear me okay? Thank you very much, Victoria. So now that you've heard about our scenarios, we designed route recommendations based on our 3 main metrics. As previously mentioned, our 3 main guiding metrics are access, equity, and efficiency. As a reminder, access in transit is simply defined as the ability to go places that you can do things. This ability both encompasses the destinations you can reach via transit, but also your ease of reaching your desired destinations. Equity focuses on making sure there are equal opportunities for transit for all potential providers. Finally, transit efficiency is focused on maximizing service at the lowest possible cost. We believe that all three of these metrics are critical for high-quality transit. We based our route recommendations on these. So in developing our recommendations for our scenarios, we referenced a variety of research and utilized several tools. We conducted our SWOT analysis to identify strengths and weaknesses of the current PMUT system in order for us to try and retain what was working and offer improvements to the system. By studying other transit authorities around the US and their operational approaches, we were able to glean several best practices and form better case studies. We then applied these best practices to the PMUT system in order to develop network designs that improve upon access, equity, and efficiency. We also looked at comprehensive plans or plan documents that cover many aspects of the community's vision for its state. We found key plan development areas and other information that helped inform our routes. We also used spatial analysis. We used GIS, otherwise known as Geographic Information Systems, and transit planning software called Remix. Remix pictured here allows us to create routes while examining data related to our three metrics. With GIS, we also created additional maps and used spatial data analysis to help inform our route design. So before we delve into our route recommendations for each scenario, I'm going to go over some of our best practices from our research. First, starting off with network design. To start, we have a grid network which designs the bus routes as a grid so that most destinations can be reached for most origins with only one transit. This is good for cities with distributed destinations such as downtown and some major. Next, we have a multi-hub network where routes start and end at prominent stations. Express routes are fast transit routes that are designed to get people between major cities. Usually the two endpoints of the route with limited stops in between. Designing these routes for commuting to major job centers. Dedicated bus lanes are parts or lanes of the road that are dedicated for the use of buses. These are often employed on popular routes and may experience high traffic congestion if slowing service down without these lanes. On-demand transit encompasses transit services that are available to people who aren't served well by traditional services. We think these on-demand services are important for rural communities in the region where traditional bus routes may not be feasible and our population is increasingly aging. It should be noted that on-demand transit is not the same, which are transit services dedicated for individuals with disabilities that prevent them from using most forms of transportation. We envision on-demand transit to be for everyone. Flex routes provide scheduled service with fixed bus stops and allow buses to travel closer to the passenger starting and ending if requested in advance. Service occurs from stop to stop at the times listed on the schedule, but may be rerouted in between stops as requested to drop off and pick up passengers. An example of this is in the existing PUJ system, the Ware Palmer service, where residents can, within a 3/4 mile of the route, can request a ride. Flex zones are a little different. They provide curb-to-curb on-demand service for predefined areas in a region. Flex zones are typically good for extending coverage in suburban rural areas that are not currently well served by traditional. Microtransit is small-scale on-demand transit services that can offer both flex service and flex routes with on-demand scheduling. The key difference here is again the scale of the transit vehicle is small. Now we can discuss our main features of the route recommendations for each scenario. Starting with a business as usual scenario, we're calling valley stasis. As a reminder, in this scenario is built on existing trends in the region, there's only slight population growth by 2040 without major changes in population distribution throughout the region. As you can see on the map, there are predicted areas of population growth, environmental justice communities, and revenue. So you have the growth areas in orange, environmental justice communities in the crosshatch, and our routes in gray. Some of our main features of our valley stasis for recommendation is the creation of a new transportation hub in Ware, as connections to Springfield and Ware are created to leverage a new intercity East 79 route from Amherst to Coast. Both an expansion of flex service areas in the region, as well as new flex zones are created to better serve our rural communities. Minor connections and changes are made in the select service area to better connect job centers, while modest improvements to existing routes are made to enhance key recreational areas in the north. Our next route recommendation is based on our new small city scenario. In this scenario, cities and towns work well together on regional initiatives to develop dense, transit-oriented communities where our small cities can thrive. Central to this scenario is our recommendation is the creation of the East-West statewide rail on the Rouse recommendation. In addition, an efficient grid network in Springfield was created to improve efficiency of service and connections to work and non-work destinations in the city. Increased express routes connecting Springfield, Northampton, and Amherst are created to better connect major centers. 4 new flex zones would also be created in West Springfield, East Hampton, Northampton, and Amherst. In addition to changes to new routes, new transit infrastructure such as dedicated bus lanes and key roadways, new parking rides would further enhance the efficiency of the system. In the Skill Valley scenario, we see a reduction in traditional 4-year college enrollment and an increase in community colleges and trade school, which fuels southern region growth. In this scenario, there's a significant decline in population in the northern service area with a significant increase in the southern service. This results in reduced service in the north while increasing access to high-frequency routes to community colleges and growing employers in the south. This northern service area would increase flex routes as population decline marks certain fixed routes on time. However, high-frequency express routes connecting the north and south are established to ensure connections between housing, education centers, and new major employment centers throughout the region. In our final scenario, called higher ground, the impacts of climate change are full display. The region we're seeing an influx of climate-based migration concentrates vulnerable populations within the region's existing environmental justice and expanding. This leads to unequal growth and exacerbates existing north-south. This scenario exposes environmental justice communities with significant impacts of climate change. UMass in the northern region flourishes as the Stockbridge School of Agriculture and Climate Change Research become increasingly. Key components of this recommendation include an expansion of service in the northern region to accommodate new growth, an existing focus on connecting rural agricultural lands, along with shifts in existing routes and hubs, are changed to influence the new population. This redesign also diverts routes and garages away from key. Now that we've given you an overview of our recommendations, each of our scenarios, I'll now discuss how we compared and scored the route designs. Again, a quick reminder of the 3 main metrics we based on: accessibility, equity, and efficiency. In each of these metrics, we chose a series of data to examine and score each route. We focused our routes in order to find out how we scored our routes in order to find out what was working well across our route redesigns across multiple steps. For access, we decided to look at the accessibility of critical destinations, work, non-work, and intramodal destinations, which refer to small-scale transit options, such as our local value bike share. For equity, we focus on environmental justice communities as our most important measure. With increased time, we would have liked to expand our measures of equity to seniors and younger people, and others to create a more robust measure of equity. As for efficiency, we measure potential ridership by the amount of population within a 4 mile of the route. We also measure the cost of systems and the cost per rider score. Once we get scored our scenarios of our recommendations, we compared the other scenarios route redesigns in all 4 of our scenarios conditions and data. This allows us to compare our 4 route redesigns across all 4 of our scenarios. We were looking for characteristics common in route redesign that scored well across multiple scenarios, find the best practices in route that scored well across that will work well for the PBTA in the future. This table is a visual of these results as the route redesign that scored the best for each metric is indicated by the name and color of the associated scenario. For example, across all 4 scenarios, the higher ground route scored the best for equity in every single scenario. This would indicate that certain aspects of this design would do well for equity in most potential futures. Overall, the results reveal the higher ground scenario route redesign were the best in access and equity. With the exception of the Skill Valley scenario around equity, where higher ground in the Valley Stasis design scored roughly the same. Valley Stasis, or business as usual, performed best for efficiency in all scenarios, while the new small city scenario had the highest frequency of routes and service. I also recommend everybody to refer to our posters on the wall on our website for more detail about routes and scoring. I would like to end this session with a quote from English scholar Jared Hall. The world is changing in non-linear ways, which means that the recent past is becoming less reliable as a guide. All this to say, the reason we didn't just send one best route for the future, that the exact future is uncertain. By creating multiple scenarios of potential futures, we can design a series of routes that will hopefully work well for the PMT in the future, if the future does end up having similar conditions to one or multiple of our scenarios. And with that, I'll pass it to my wonderful colleague.
We will now close out our presentation by discussing. We'll now close out our presentation by discussing implications and key takeaways for the PBTA. Our route recommendations were designed to address what the Transit Equity Dashboard terms public transportation's ladder of opportunity by providing affordable, convenient connections to jobs, medical care, to all daily life essentials. In our midterm presentation, we introduced Maria, an adaptation from Jarrett Walker's explanation of access. Maria is in a city full of possibilities. Maria rides public transit and can get anywhere in the Highland. These are all the destinations she can reach within that 45-minute access area. The goal of our scenario planning is for the PBTA to be ready, no matter what happens, to maintain and even improve access to vital destinations. Whether it looks like Valley Stasis, the new small city, Skilled Valley, or the higher ground scenario, PBTA can be ready to provide access to it. We will now transition to discuss our key recommendations, starting with the top 3 interventions that scored high across all of our scenarios. The first is increasing the use of express routes. This strategy was used in each scenario's redesign. It scored particularly high in a new small city, where express routes were incorporated throughout the network and had the highest frequency score. Several planners we interviewed also recommended this change. Our second high-scoring intervention is the development of dedicated bus lanes. While we weren't able to test the strategy on frequency, the new small city identified turning 7 on State Street, which has the second highest ridership of the PBTA, into a dedicated bus lane. This strategy is currently being implemented in the MBTA service area with great success. The MBTA having created a working group of municipalities to identify routes and coordinate construction. And third, we recommend implementing flex zones or routes in low density areas. The network redesigned for higher ground used flex routes to allow for user adaptation of the system, enabling novel stop requests and addressing first last mile access to the northern agricultural employment destinations. New Small City incorporated flex zones to connect riders to fixed routes. These 2 redesigns used either flex zones or flex routes with great success, increasing accessibility for evolving demand and reaffirming the success of the PBTA's own flex route for Congress. We've also come up with 5 policy and operations recommendations that can be implemented based on our extensive research. First, we see a great opportunity in partnering with local employers like Bay State, similar to what Go Triangle in North Carolina has done. These partnerships can incentivize commuting via bus to work, similar to UMass subsidizing students, replicating that experience through the network. Going off a similar note, parking rides are an excellent way to connect people where they are to the PBTA system. Currently, the PBTA has 5 parking rides or parking garages available to riders, with most of them available locally. We see an opportunity to increase the number of parking rides, similar to what CT Transit offers, perhaps not in scope, but in terms of frequency in the service area. This strategy was also implemented in all 4 route redesigns. Another key strategy for the PBTA would be to further diversify the system, both in size and energy use. PBTA is already doing this, with the UMass Garage having received their first electric bus this month. We see further strategic diversification of the PBTA's fleet, similar to CT Transit's approach, as an important step in using resources efficiently and servicing riders more effectively. The next recommendation is to improve bus stop amenities. As we can see in the map to the left, the PBTA service area is lacking shelters and shade protection, particularly in the south and in EJ communities highlighted in hatches. Providing shelters, offering system maps, signs with live updates, and providing English as a second language would better serve communities and improve the experience of riding the PBTA, likely attracting new riders. Valley Bike is an important local micro-mobility company. We recommend better coordination with them, as do several of the planners we interviewed, in order to address first and last mile access. And finally, to address worker shortages, we see the recent passage of the Drive Safe Act as an opportunity for the PBTA to attract young workers. This act was included in the new infrastructure bill and reduces the age for obtaining a CDL from 21 to 18. PBTA already offers CDL training to student drivers at UMass and recently brought it back to SACCO. It also has a close working relationship with UMass's Transit Operations Certificate Program. We recommend finding more opportunities to attract new talents, such as partnering with local tech high schools, community colleges, and even working with local CDL training companies such as Tri-State and Springfield to attract young people to work for the PBTA and hopefully start them on a lifelong career. And so, what's next? Our deliverable is a network redesign for the next 20 years. To get there, we are working in 4 phases over 2 weeks. Phase 1 will be completed this month. In phase 2, UMass's engineering school will do energy modeling, data and tech analysis, and finance and fair restructuring options. The next planning studio in fall 2022 will conduct an extensive public engagement process to get feedback on our recommendations, which will then inform refined recommendations using more specific measures. The last phase will include final revisions, receiving more public feedback, and the eventual adoption of recommendations. In the meantime, you can stay up to date by visiting our website, valleyonboard.org. There you will find the work we have done and work in progress, and the information on future presentations. One last thought to leave you with. Through this process, PTA can be better positioned and prepared for the future. No matter what happens, we have all so appreciated the opportunity to help you towards that end. On behalf of my colleagues, I would like to thank all of our partners and everyone who joined us today. And now we will open the floor to questions and comments.
So I guess now you can all see why I'm so really proud of this group of 18 students who have worked harder and longer than they should have, but they pulled it off. So I want to open the floor to Q&A, and Sandra, as you take a sip of coffee, I hate to put you on the spot, but I would love to start with Sandra. Sandra is the administrator of the PBTA. We affectionately refer to her as the big boss in our studio. And so Sandra, if you have questions or comments that you would like to kick off, we'll head to you first.
Excuse me. First, I want to thank you for agreeing to participate in this project. I know Toulouse brought this to your attention, and when she brought that project to us, it's very exciting to have the students from the university where we have such a extensive network of routes participate on this. So thank you very much. Thank you, Caleb, Victoria, Brendan, and Olivia for the presentation. It was great, just very similar to the presentation. Really impressed by the quality of the product that you have produced. And I think there's a lot of information for us to take over and for us to share with MassDOT on how something can be done with a local university. We don't have to spend millions and millions of dollars to do a research project and really get good results. I think the scenario planning was really good and very thoughtful. I was wondering if I haven't had a chance to look at the recommendations. Are we going route by route level, or is it just general? I mean, I know you did the flex service and we were talking about where in Palmer, so I wasn't sure if we're doing at each route or the types of route, the tier ones, the tier twos.
Each scenario. Team within the studio,
Okay,
and they each make adjustments to it. In some cases, there's new routes, so some new express routes, maybe
Okay,
there
got
is
it.
like an added stop to an existing express route, G73E, as well as changes to frequency. With the current some sort of division of service into.
oh, okay,
So
Okay.
within there's more explanation of the individual recommendations in these posters and then individual tables in the report.
perfect. I just wanted to know how detailed you were going into the route scenario and how much information was given, because I know you were using Remax to get some of that data. So whether we are getting head weight information, frequency, length, and all this stuff. And you're also recommending the type of vehicle to operate for that? And if we're doing a flex service, are you doing a smaller?
Yeah.
You're doing, okay. Okay. Okay.
We use both.
Yes, I'm writing.
The quote says, Henry is writing that report on the section, writing that section of the report on new vehicles.
Okay, that's good. I mean, that's good information because, we have what we call a capital improvement project, capital improvement plan that we put together for Mass DOT, where we tell them in advance what our needs are as for the next 5 years. So getting some of that information will be very helpful as we sit down and finalize the plan for this year and, take into consideration some of the recommendations that you're making as we kind of think of how we will best implement some of that, some of the recommendations and how that's going to impact the current fleet that we have and the service that we provide. I know we have discussed in-house doing more flex routes and having smaller vehicles, and that, leads into us contacting Mass DOT and saying, okay, we need more funding for this. We do have the infrastructure, and I did notice you mentioned the electric bus. So it was Olivia that did. Yes, we do have a new electric bus here at UMass, and hopefully for next year, we'll have 2 additional vehicles added to the fleet. But with that comes a lot of infrastructure requirements. The power that comes from the grid, how to charge the vehicles, how many chargers do you need per vehicle? Like I got a report from Sanco that the chargers that they have are first generation chargers are 60 kilowatts. Vehicles have batteries that are 400 kilowatts. It takes 8 hours to charge it. There's only 6 chargers. The charger that you may ask got is 150 or 125 kilowatts. It only takes 4 hours to charge that vehicle. So it's a huge difference. And so we have to really plan those things and all that stuff. And one of the things that is, I caution you, you have recommendations and we will do the best that we can to implement the ones based on the final report once you get public input and all that. But it takes a little while to get everything running. I mean, we wanted electric buses at UMass almost like 4 or 5 years ago, but it's taken this long to be able to actually get that money for the infrastructure and then purchase the vehicle and have it delivered. Yes.
Overnight.
Correct. Yeah, so, yeah, for powering the buses, what we do is for powering the facilities. We do have a farm in Hadley, or is that Hatfield, and it's uses cow manure to produce energy, and so that we get credits for using that facility to power our facilities. But yeah, it's all kind of like a planning process of stages, and so I just really want you to take that into consideration. If there are things that are short-term that we could do quickly, that doesn't require so much of a capital investment, and you think that this route, you could change it right away, just put a paratransit vehicle, just one for the time until you get a new vehicle. Those would be great, because then we could see something immediate, as opposed to waiting until we have the facilities and then the vehicles. And on the recommendation for the amenities for passengers, that is something that I know Paul and his staff has been working greatly. We are concerned that we don't have sufficient amenities for our passengers. And it's a combination of land use requirements for each of the communities that we service. So some of them are really, oh yes, we'll help you with the shelters and all that stuff. Some communities are really opposed to that. So some information on some of the land use that changes that might be required will be helpful. How to work with the individuals in each community, or something that says, each community should take this into consideration will also be helpful. I know that
is the space and talk about communities, how do we address roots? Should we, other ways
and there are specific requirements, the shelters, and the access between the curb, the grass, and the sidewalk, and how much space you have on the sidewalk. So some locations works perfectly, for others it doesn't, but we could put different amenities. Like we have, we're working to get solar lights at different rural areas that have bus stops, and there's no lighting, so you can't really see if anyone's waiting. There's also this little fence that is a pull, and you hold it, and you can just sit on this little tiny fan. So there's little things that are changing that we can do. So so those are some of the fences, not just always the shelter, the big shelter, which obviously provides, especially for weather here, protection from the snow and whatnot. But that also requires maintenance, and who's going to do that, and so that's a concern for us as well, because we don't have a crew to remove snow. It's supposed to be everyone's in the bylaws of each community. If it's in your property and in your sidewalk, you're supposed to clean the shelter and the bus stop, but that does not happen. So there's little things like that, but I think that the path that you take into scenarios, I know Tolu brought those over to us and for us to give some feedback. I thought it was great. I think you're really, really on the correct path for us to get some information. And I do want to make sure that that when you go out to get public participation, we would like to be there as well, so that we can listen what the public has to say and then have it part of our process as well. So thank you so much. I mean, like I said, the last time, I'm really impressed with this group, and I will pitch it again. You will get an A+.
I wanted, related to this note about coordination with planners that both brought up, Henry had a note, something that came up from the planner.
I want to say that we do recognize that some municipalities in the valley are hesitant on the idea of bus lanes. However, the data coming from the Boston region shows that bus lanes really improve service very much.
Yeah, so along with the shelters and facilities, we know that those changes are hard.
But I think it's because our area is very car-centric. We haven't got away from, we need to park right in front of where we need to go, which is, I think, one of the things that I keep discussing with Paul. We have a new medical facility in East Long Meadow, and they built a building right next to the sidewalk. The parking's on the back. And I said, if everyone did that, then the bus would just go in front, not have to go inside and then come back out. How many Stop and Shops and Big Y's and every single facility, we have to go in, Walmart's, Targets, just go in and come back out. And that just adds so much time to our schedule. But we can drop people off. I mean, especially on Boston Road, whoever rode the B7, you have to walk the whole, what's the name of it? The dollar store, all the little food places, and then continue on, and then the whole parking lot for Walmart. You can't do to someone that's elderly and disabled carrying packages. And every time we try to do that in the West Springfield, the R14 to reduce the time, not going to Big Y, and everyone complained, no, we have the groceries. We can't just cross Memorial Drive with all the groceries. Oh, yeah, we understand that. But we just have to change our mind. It's not about cars, it's about moving people.
We have a friendly audience. Or Alex, or any of you with questions, Paul? I know you.
I mean, I certainly appreciate all your efforts. I think it's an excellent presentation. The only thought I had that was a little concerning was 4 scenarios are really neat. Unfortunately, as we know, as this rolls out, none of those scenarios will be. So I'm just hoping there's flexibility in to do some of A, some of option B. We can look at nice presentation. There's just so much in here to look at.
Reasonable. Please visit our website, Paul.
What does it say? It has been this really good presentation. Going into details, responding to the feedback that we provided so far. I think, like Paul and Sandra mentioned, like looking at the timeline of these recommendations, many times we think the recommendations, one time, it all shows up tomorrow. I think thinking through the timeline of the recommendations as well is an important consideration. But overall, and I'm also very curious to see some of your remix scenarios to see how those were done, calculated, the scoring for the different scenarios. And that'd be very interesting. And Remix also did work as for feedback that you guys enjoyed using it. So I will be asking you all for that.
And they will give it to you.
Yeah, so we can give them feedback and hopefully continue this partnership. Thank you all.
Okay. So I think probably most of my feedback is going to be, route by route, or maybe even just scenario by scenario. But I just have one question: just seeing all 4 overall scenario maps, how they were ranked according to those categories, frequency, access, etc. Some which I don't think was mentioned in the presentation, but which I imagine really factored was what kind of funding constraints you impose on each scenario, and was it one, like one imagined budget for all 4, or were they different budgets for different scenarios?
At least comment to, so the driver funding, we thought about the implications of shifts in populations and resulting increases and decreases in overall tax base. For example, in the new small city, we envision a larger, younger working population, which would boost general density, resulting in higher taxes. Ideally, making it easier for the PDTA to pitch to the state officials and the state level applications to roll out additional funding to provide for the expansion. So within them, the exact dollar amounts, sort of more macro approach, that if this occurs, we would ideally have more funding, which would allow for the expansion, or in a contraction situation, the reverse, and therefore certain services have to kind of go away to the depression. But as far as like down to the dollar, the analysis was done. It's kind of 40 years from now.
Right, I think,
Clarify.
definitely, but I think I also want to clarify my question a little bit more, is, the scenario which, scored highest on late access was the underground scenario. The one which scored highest on frequency was the, new small cities scenario. And so I know that frequency, one of the obstacles to making frequency, high frequency universal around the network is that it's always more expensive to provide. So, you're just putting more drivers in the same group, so it raises your operating costs. And so, if there were no budgetary constraints in a scenario, you could just go ahead and design a system which is very extensive and also has very high frequency. But since there appeared to be this trade-off between the frequency of a scenario routes and the amount of ground they cover, I just assumed that there would be some kind of funding constraints imposed. And so I was wondering, if all 4 scenarios just kind of had the same, I guess, like remix budget. How much money were you spending for operations?
The answer is no. Each system had a different cost, and so there was, we were struggling with how much of the scoring do we show on the presentation. There's more elaborate score parts of each scenario on the posters, and feel free to take a look at this. I think there's also, to some degree, this feedback that you're giving is great. And, we were figuring out how to score them while we were constructing this. So there's a score of cost per ridership. And so, like Ben was saying, yes, each scenario itself was constructed with the mentality of different funding sources and amounts. So in certain scenarios, there's a lot of state and federal funding policies like the federal infrastructure bill, or the federal government and state government responding to climate change by funding for certain things. But it equated to different alternatives having pretty different budgets. So you see, the new small city did have the highest budget. That's for what you're saying about efficiency. And then the higher round scenario had the second highest budget because it expanded access on a lot of things. And then the Skilled Valley scenario had the smallest budget, I believe, but the new services operating under the assumption that UMass is not as much a source of additional funding be the state for the system. We did play with it. Better reflect.
Right, and I think that kind of goes back to the very first thing that I started with, which is I think most of my feedback was kind of on actually getting to that route by route and scenario by scenario, especially within remix, but also
In developing these scenarios, there's also going to be a significant planning and zoning component. Was that even considered in the possibilities of how these changes? Because to go to that small cities proposal probably requires significant zoning change in all those communities. Is the timeline for that considered, or is it just assuming that this takes place?
Speaking specifically to the new small city scenario, one of the two sort of like major components of that, actualizing and becoming the reality, probably be also got one is like regional recommendation adoption across the board. And that's why it's a really when reviewing the comprehensive plans, looked at what EDC, EV, planning commission, like a lot of acronyms, sort of suggested, particularly like in Valley Vision, right? There was this idea of incentivizing expansion of the Springfield area and sort of looking at development around it. One of the biggest challenges is that this is much like my home state of Connecticut. It's a home rule area, and regionalism and county government approach, like that is incredibly difficult to.
Like you just hear the response in, let's say, Palmer, density properties, and that's going to create a big backlash.
Correct, and that's probably the biggest barrier to that occurring. I think it was necessary to consider the fact that there's the potential for that, and that you have generational shifts of younger residents who are maybe we're looking to live in cities more, pushing for their local legislatorships and policymakers to getting involved, prioritize transit. Those are the sorts of high level approaches that we have to do something. Absolutely, to come here and say, oh yeah, everyone's just gonna, as we could say, kumbaya in the studio, hop on board is absolutely a challenge.
And I guess when you look at it, you can create these scenarios based on what is more likely to happen, or, I mean, it's probably going to be a combination, right? 2 or 3 of these scenarios, but do you score it all based on likelihood?
Part of the scenario development, I believe, was to try to cover the gamut of possible futures. As part of that process, we had to sort of push the boundaries. What would happen if we got a regional connection, all these things are tied together to kind of cover that bandwidth of potential futures? But we do understand much of what's built into that is going to be facing significant backlash. Communities as far as high-end regional collaboration, also the building of a lot of the critical infrastructure. So it was more so we can think about how this happened.
Now it's more theoretical.
Also, so in some of the scenarios, they used either business as usual, so assume similar just zoning. New small cities to wrap up, summarize, and envision radically different regional collaboration, dream scenario. Whereas the third and fourth scenario looked at population growth within existing high multi-family housing zones. So we were looking at like what both the EJ communities grew right now based on current policy. That's where they would probably congregate, and that's where the ETA would need to increase. And so the biggest difference is just that they're sort of different within those two scenarios. Higher ground envisioned environmental justice growth in the south, and Skill Valley envisioned actually equally EJ community growth in the south and in the north because of UMass. The growth of the job economy surrounding UMass in the north would decrease and would actually cause income-based EJ communities. And so there was a connection with them, very much so within our scenario.
And within your planner interviews, I think, Paul, to your point, that was one of the fundamental reasons why they went and interviewed planners to see, I think, firsthand what you all had told us, which was, here are the challenges associated with doing shelters, installing infrastructure, with thinking about the land use transportation connection. And so a lot of that interview knowledge too is in their final report and really centers on your concern here, which I think was well-founded, obviously. And then I want to transition to questions from faculty, but go ahead.
We created these routes to theoretically when we did the grading, we actually created each of the routes. So that we basically at 16 we gave you that summary table.
Dean Rethmeyer, do you have questions, comments?
So first of all, congratulations on a really professional, excellent presentation. Very well done, and I'm proud to be affiliated with high quality outcomes. Thank you. I do have a couple of SWOT questions that are really about thinking about the scenario going forward. So one is thinking about, you've made projections about what might happen to UMass and community colleges. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that because it's a major concern, obviously, for us. For a long time, we've known that the college demographic is in decline. We used to think in 2025, we think that COVID may have changed that dynamic. One of your scenarios talks about an increase in community college enrollments. In some places drop by as much as a foot. So that's significant. And I do wonder whether in your planning you've thought about the possibility of autonomous vehicles and that technology, how that might both provide an opportunity to use that technology in the transit system may also be a threat because it reinforces the core culture and may have a public competitor that is dispatched. I'd be interested in hearing about some of the threats to the scenarios. Very impressive.
Thank you. Who wants to tackle that? Wants to tackle AVs. Henry's typing.
Technology that's available now is certainly improving. Safety concerns. Being said, vehicles are small occupancy, small occupancy. Tax credit is obviously incentivizing that. Shift into a culture. Things that too, some of the stuff on autonomous certainly is a fear. I'm curious to see what access.
Investment of very smart. Lose a year. Be a constant because parts that buy the operations, so names.
Your comment that I don't steal all of Henry's thunder on that. Henry, do you want to?
As for the AV question, we did not have time to explore that. But I do worry that AVs in car culture is a threat to all transit.
Yeah, you're right. Okay. Thank you. Other questions from faculty? Elizabeth, Henry, Michael, Mo?
I want to confer with the other comments. I had many students that seem to have always been engaged with the students. thrilled to see all of you up there. Very professional. Content. Trying to speak and the audience. See, one question I had though that I would love to hear about is the one graphic that showed equity going across. I was curious about the high ground scheme, the range high for equity. I don't understand.
So I think maybe it's a kind of lack of clarification on what the map was indicating. It was actually showing an expansion of environmental justice communities. So rather, those are the areas where we are proposing to expand service in order to address that equity gap.
And so here you can see that the routes that were designed to expand service to those communities perform the best in terms of all of the ways in which we measure equity. We measure equity in terms of routes going through communities. So it's a mutually reinforcing design and measurement.
And just a quick add-on, the higher ground scenario does the best with coverage routes. And so because they do the best with coverage, they just happen to cover the most in environmental justice laws. So they're not really, it's not necessarily centered around cities necessarily, but it's covering a lot of rural areas that do happen to be often environmental justice. How does Springfield affect it? So you want to
So no service was removed from Springfield. There was some frequency in Springfield. There was also some expansion of routes between Springfield and Holyoke, and Belchertown. Yeah, if you want to know more about specific routes and have questions, route specific questions rather, feel free to dig into the posters. There's 2 poster stations, so it's not theirs. Well, there are 3 maps per poster, and one of them is express routes and frequencies.
And the metrics are created.
And the metrics that are elaborated on.
We knew you would ask this, Springfield. John?
I don't need the mic. I'm very curious. This week, at the county papers, you stand for transit. And it's going to impact transit. And I'm wondering first, where does that sort of change come in? And I've got a couple of questions also, changes in taking those 2 changes, and I'm sure there are others, how will they be reflected? I'm just curious.
Speak to Express Rail. Or no,
Yeah.
That's okay.
You're also a person who doesn't.
I project. I really, in reality, I don't get better. But so the East-West Rail was really included as part of the new small city scenario, where we see a lot of that funding go into big transit public transit projects. And so that East-West Rail line, connects Springfield to Palmer, right? There's a stop in Palmer. And so one example of in the new small city alternative is an extension of the 45 bus from Belchertown to Palmer. And so that extension may influence growth in both Belchertown and Palmer, and gets UMass people around the UMass area to that stop in Palmer to hop on that rail to go east to Worcester and Boston. So that's just one example.
And I'll also add to that the frequency recommendations are make that potentially an express route that's in alignment with the rail schedule. So some of the new lines that are incorporated to the different alternative route recommendations are low frequency, and they're in accordance with specific time frames, whether it's high cetera.
I was also going to say, John, to your other question, a lot of that TOD work and planning work is considered in this policy and politics driver. And so it might be feasible that next year's studio really says, okay, what did Governor Baker say we should do? And how does that change, modify these scenarios and the corresponding route recommendations to reflect that? Sure.
Well done.
Other questions, Henry?
No, I need to look at the maps. I think it's.
Mark? Do you need this?
Yeah, so we'll have a more spirited briefing later today, but for now, first of all, yes. Already been mentioned, but process of development. Laid out relationship, area, access, equity, and efficiency. Obvious, really have to underscore how much values are recognized. Historian of Science and Technology says, technology in your future scenarios, intelligent education systems, IoT, possibility of these this is a big political lift, but mobility, then finally, I just want to recommend resource previous there are pieces on really freedom choice. Forward. And finally, here pre-COVID days, having competition and innovation. Software interactive.
Well, I hope someone's taking notes. But thank you all for coming. We have the room until 11, so please feel free to stay, mingle, look at the maps, and ask the really hard questions to the students when we're not mic'd up. Great job.
Okay, sure. And for the setup upgrade a couple years ago. And you know, it was around kind of automated technology and the changes, mainly looking at like commercial driving industry. And then you mentioned the, you know,